The way that we solve our problems, when we talk about the relationships that we bring into our lives, the choices that we make in our lives, as different as they are from one another, there's a common theme that runs through all of them. If I said to you, the way you answer a single question holds that key, would you want to know what that question is? If I said to you that the way you answer one question, it holds the key to every belief that you have ever created, every belief that you've developed about yourself, your self-esteem, your relationships, other people, your finances, your health, the way that you live your life, the choices that you make. If I said the way that you answer a single question is the underlying thread for all of those things, as different as they are from one another, would you want to know what that question is? Every human who has ever walked the face of this earth, from the time that they were aware of themselves and their relationship to the world, has asked this single question, consciously or subconsciously. And the question is simply this: who am I? Who am I? I'm going to make this personal. I'm going to invite you to ask, who are you? And there are a lot of us in the world. Who are we? Why this is important is what I want to talk to you about today. The way we have been conditioned to answer this question for ourselves often comes from the ideas and the beliefs and the thinking of other people. Think about this in your own life. If I ask you, who are you? And you begin to answer me, where do your answers come from? Typically, they come from what we've heard from other people. They come from our textbooks and our classrooms and our schools. They come from our families, from our neighbors, from our religious institutions. They come from our spiritual traditions. And all of these beliefs woven together form the perceptual lens through which you and I see ourselves, our relationship to our own bodies, our relationship to other people, our relationship to the world around us, our relationship to the past, to the future, to the cosmos, to God. What could be more important than answering this question in a way that is honest, truthful, and factual? New discoveries have now overturned 150 years of scientific thinking when it comes to this simple question. For 150 years, we have been steeped in a story about us and our relationship to the world. The story has served us. It's worked well enough to get us where we are today. But now that we're living our time of extremes, our story must change to reflect the new discoveries, the honesty and the truthfulness of those new discoveries, so that we can meet this time of extremes in a way that is effective, that is sustainable, that allows us to thrive in the new world that's emerging. For over 30 years, I have had the opportunity to search some of the most isolated, pristine, remote, magnificent, and beautiful places remaining on the earth today, to find the secrets that are hidden in the monasteries and the nunneries and the texts, the wisdom that our ancestors had in their time that we're only beginning to understand in ours. Through my discoveries, I now have 11 core books that address the principles, the wisdom of our ancestors through science and spirituality. 5 of those have become New York Times best-selling books. They're now published in 38 languages, and they are merged with corporate careers. I was a geologist during the first energy crisis of the 1970s. I worked in the defense industry as a senior liaison for the United States Space Command during the 1980s in the Cold War crisis. And in 1991, I became the first technical operations manager for Cisco's system. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because each of these careers has been during a time of crisis. And my job has been to find the answers during the time of crisis that helps us to transcend, not just survive, but to thrive in the time of crisis. Well, I'm no longer working in those corporations today. I'm an independent author, and I'm sharing with you the discoveries that I have made over those last 30 years, because we are living a time of crisis, a time when cycles are converging to create the extremes in our lives, the cycles of climate, economy, conflict, and war. So as we explore these principles of our most cherished and ancient and sacred traditions, and we marry them with the best science of our day, what we're doing is we are giving ourselves an evolutionary edge that our ancestors never had. The best of the science and the best of 5,000 years of human experience and wisdom, all merged into a single wisdom that's more than the science can be by itself. It's more than the spiritual principles can be by themselves. And in doing so, we awaken within us the deepest truths of our existence. What I've found in those monasteries and nunneries and with the monks and the nuns and the abbots and the shaman and the people that I've spent time with, because it all comes back to you and me. It's about us. Who are we in this world? What is our relationship to our bodies, our true relationship? Are we empowered to participate, not control, manipulate, but participate in the healing of our bodies? Are we empowered to influence the circumstances of our lives, or are we simply victims of a world that we have no control over? These are the kinds of questions that our ancestors have sought the answers for 5,000 years. And while they weren't scientists, they developed understandings, spiritual traditions that answered for them in their time the questions in a way that worked for them in their lives so they could become better people and have stronger families and stronger communities. You and I live in the world of science. Science isn't 5,000 years old. It's a relatively new way of looking at the world. It's only about 300 years old. And for 300 years, science has tried to answer this question, who are we? Science has told us a story. That story is at the core of the way that you and I live our lives, the way we think, the way we solve our problems, the kinds of relationships that we find ourselves immersed in, and our most intimate experiences, as well as through work and school and friendships, healing and health. New discoveries in the late 20th and now the early 21st century have now overturned 150 years of scientific thinking, writing a new story about you and me. And that story is what the core of this series is all about. Let me just give you an example of why this is important and how it's played a powerful role in my life. I had a supervisor that told me, said, Greg, you cannot serve two masters at the same time. You cannot serve the master of science and the master of spirituality. You must choose. This was a difficult choice for me to make because I'd worked very hard to get where I was, to get my degree, to get into the corporations, to have the security that I found myself in. And I was being asked to make a choice to follow my heart or to honor that security. So I took a little bit of time off. My journey took me to a beautiful mountaintop, Mount Sinai, on the desert peninsula of Egypt. And at the top of Mount Sinai, just as the sun was setting over the horizon, something happened. This feeling welled up inside of me, and this openness between my heart and my mind, and all of a sudden, I knew that in that opening, I had the opportunity to receive the answer to any question I could possibly ask. I closed my eyes and I said, if I left this world in this moment and I could never come back to the place and the people and the experiences that I'd known through my lifetime, if I left this world and looked back on everything that I had ever done and I could never come back, would I feel complete with my life? Would I feel complete? And before I even finished the question in my mind, the feeling in my body and from my heart, this answer was welling up, and it was no, it was screaming no inside my body. I wouldn't feel complete. And my next question then was, what would it take for me to say yes? What would it take for me to say, yes, I feel complete with what I have done in my life? Now, the reason I'm asking this question is because I was being given a choice about my career. I had to either honor the science in its purity or follow my heart and explore the spiritual traditions. The answer, when I said, what would it take to say yes? That was my measuring stick by which I would gauge every choice, every opportunity that has ever come across my path from that moment in 1986 to this moment that I'm sitting here talking to you today. And this is why I'm sharing this with you. The intuition that I experienced in that moment that empowered me to make a choice wisely in my life based on something that I knew was true for me, not what other people were telling me, that was a result of an intuitive experience. However, it happened as a result of the beauty of the sunset and the surrounding. It happened spontaneously. And my question was this: how do I have that experience when I want it and when I need it? What if the sun isn't there? What if the desert isn't there? How do we create these deep intuitive experiences on demand, by choice, when we choose, without having the world trigger them within us? Well, the answer to that question is held in the new discoveries that have overturned those 150 years of scientific thinking about you and me. Because the truth is, you and I are wired. We are wired for precisely such experiences and all that that encompasses. The short answer I can tell you right now is this: you are absolutely not what you have been told, and you are more than you have ever imagined. In the subsequent videos, I'm going to share the details of what I found in those monasteries and those nunneries, what those scientific discoveries are telling us, and what the details are going to say to you and to me is that we are literally wired for these extraordinary experiences. We are human by design, and to the degree that we can embrace that in our everyday lives, we become better people and we create a better world. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video with me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. When science tries to answer the question, who am I, or who are we, they say that to answer that question, they must first answer 6 sub-questions. They are called the perennial questions of life. They're called perennial because these are questions that have been asked by every civilization from the time that records have been kept when it comes to this understanding. 6 sub-questions, and scientists say if we can answer those 6 questions, now we can answer the big question, who are we? Hello, I'm Greg Braden, and I'd like to welcome you to the second video in this series. In our last video, we explored a very, very powerful question. It was a simple question: who am I? And there are a lot of us in this world. The question became, who are we? For 5,000 years, those who have come before us, our indigenous ancestors, they answered the question in a way that made sense to them. It wasn't science, but it worked for them. It helped them to create better lives and stronger families and stronger, healthier communities. We live in the modern world, in the Western world, the world of science. Science is only about 300 years old. And for 300 years, science has asked the very same question: who am I as individuals? Who are we collectively? And science has developed a story based upon what they have believed to be true over these last 300 years. I mentioned in the last video that new discoveries now have overturned 150 years of that thinking, 150 years of the scientific story. A new story is emerging. It's a story of you and me, and a new understanding of who we are in our relationship to the world, and that is what I want to talk to you about right now. So what I'm going to invite you to do, in the whiteboard of your mind, if you can envision an inverted pyramid, an upside down pyramid, so the apex, the point is at the bottom, and it's at the point where we will begin with the most fundamental of these 6 questions, and then I will quickly go through each of the subsequent questions as we move to the top of the pyramid. So the very first question, the bottom of this pyramid, is what is the origin of life? Where does life come from? It's the first question. The second question, what is the origin of human life? Because maybe human life doesn't come from where the other life comes from. That's an interesting question. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. The third question, what is our relationship to our bodies? Are we separate from our bodies? Are we powerless when it comes to influencing the well-being and the healing of our bodies, or is there something else that's happening? The next question, what is our relationship to the world beyond our bodies? It's very similar to the previous question, but it's about us and our relationship to the world out there. Are we somehow connected to that world, or are we separate and powerless to influence the circumstances of our lives? Do things just happen for no reason? The next question, what is our relationship to the past? Do we have a linear relationship to civilization? In other words, has it happened only one time? Did civilization begin 5,000 years ago, as we've been taught in the schools for the last 150 years? And there has been a linear progression to the pinnacle of sophistication that we find in our world today. Is that really what civilization is all about? Is there something more? The next question, the last question, is what is our relationship to nature? What is the fundamental rule of the natural world? Well, these are the questions that science uses to answer, who am I? If you were educated in the West, as I was, and I think most of us probably were, in the last 150 years, we have been steeped in the scientific story. It is a story of separation, competition, and conflict. That story says, as we begin at the bottom of the pyramid, that the origin of life, it's completely random. Now we know the physical evidence no longer supports that. The origin of human life. What is the origin of human life? We've been told that is completely random, and the theory of evolution has been used to justify that. What I'm going to share with you today is why that theory no longer supports the ideas when it comes to humans. So I want to be really clear about this. Evolution is a fact for some forms of life. As a geologist, I can see that. But when it comes to humans, the evidence breaks down. And we're going to dive a little deeper into that in just a few moments. The next question, what is our relationship to our bodies? We've been taught that we are separate from our bodies, that we are essentially powerless when it comes to the healing and the ability to influence what happens in our bodies. The next question, what is our relationship to the world around us? We have been taught that we are separate from our world and essentially powerless when it comes to influencing the events of life in the world around us. The next question, what have we been taught for 150 years? Is that civilization is linear. It happened one time. It began about 5,000, maybe 5,500 years ago, during the time of ancient Sumeria, and that there has been this linear progression, this is what we're taught, evolving over time to the sophistication of what we see today. The last question, 1859, Charles Darwin released a book entitled The Origin of Species. And in that book, he defined what we now have believed to be the fundamental rule of nature. And that is the rule of survival of the strongest. And these are Darwin's own words from his text. Survival of the strongest, that nature is based upon this model of competition and conflict. So in your mind's eye, if you can see this in the pyramid on the left-hand side, if you're taking notes at the very top of your pyramid, write false scientific assumptions and then put a big X through every one of those things that I just mentioned. Because it is now peer-reviewed science. It's not my opinion, it's not my theory, it's not my hypothesis, it's not Greg's story. Peer-reviewed science has now overturned every one of those ideas, of those beliefs that you and I have been taught, the story that you and I have been taught. But here's the thing. There is a reluctance, and I think it's fair to say, in many cases, a resistance in mainstream media to share the new discoveries in public classrooms, in public textbooks, in public television documentaries. We are clinging, maybe not you and me, academia is clinging to the old story. New discoveries have now overturned every one of those ideas. I'm going to share these with you right now. In your mind's eye, in that inverted pyramid, if you begin at the bottom, the origin of life, we know it's not random. The origin of human life is definitely not random. DNA is telling us this. Our relationship to our bodies, we know that we are deeply connected to our bodies. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs trigger the chemistry in our heart and our brain that is released into the body, and those emotions are based upon the way that we feel and our perceptions and our response to what happens in our lives and our world. The next question, our relationship to the world beyond our bodies. We now know that we are deeply connected to the world beyond our bodies, and science is telling us this. I have to tell you, it's no longer a question in the scientific world as to whether or not we are connected to one another in all things. Quantum physics has now told us that the connection exists. Here's the question. The question is, how deep does that connection go? How much influence do we really have when it comes to us and our relationship to the world around us? These are the things that we're going to explore through this series. And the question of civilization, is it linear? No, the new discoveries are telling us now that civilization is cyclic. We are living the most recent 5,000-year cycle of civilization that did begin 5,500 years ago in ancient Sumeria. But the archaeological evidence, peer-reviewed evidence, so it's accepted in the scientific world, is now telling us there was another cycle before that, another 5,000-year cycle, and probably one even before that that is pushing the date for technologically advanced civilizations back into the last ice age and before. So we're talking 12, 15,000 years ago is when these advanced technological civilizations existed. The last of our questions, and this is so powerful. What is the fundamental rule of nature? We've been taught that that fundamental rule is competition and conflict. The best science of the 20th and now the 21st century is telling us that while competition happens, and we certainly see that, nature is based on the model of cooperation and what biologists call mutual aid. And to the degree that we see the competition and the conflict, that tells us how far we have strayed from the natural order, from nature's deepest truths. So when we consider all of these things, this pyramid now becomes the lens of perception through which we may answer the question, who am I? And when we begin to see ourselves as connected to one another, connected to our bodies, connected to the world, in a world of cooperation, living in a civilization that is cyclic and has a history that we can learn from, it changes everything. It changes everything. For example, what I'd like to do, let me just zero in on one of these items that I think is so powerful and makes such a difference in your life and my life right now. And that is this idea of evolution and where we come from. We have been taught since 1859, since Darwin released his book, The Origin of Species, that we are the product of a long evolutionary journey that happened through these mutations, random mutations. When the mutations serve us, we keep them, and when we don't, we discard them. But the evidence no longer supports this. The DNA no longer supports this. I'm just going to cut to the chase right here. Humans, modern humans, us, we showed up on this earth 200,000 years ago. We do not know how or where or why we showed up. There appears to be no evolutionary path leading to our appearance. We showed up intact with everything that we have today. We showed up all of a sudden with a 50% larger brain size than the nearest primate, an advanced nervous system, an advanced ability for language, advanced ability for digital access to our world, opposing thumbs and forefingers. And here's the key. We showed up with access, the ability to intentionally access an extended neural network in a way that no other form of life has. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean to you and me? That's where we're going here. Extended neural network. In 1991, scientists discovered in the human heart 40,000 specialized cells. They're called sensory neurites. They are specialized cells that are essentially brain-like cells, but they're not in the brain in our head. They're in our heart. And there's such a concentration of them that they're actually called the little brain in the heart. Here's why this is important. These sensory neurites, only discovered in 91, published in 94. I mean, this is how recent this information is. These specialized cells, they think independently of the neurons in our brain. These specialized cells in our heart, they remember independently of the brain in our head. They learn independently of the brain in our head. Okay, so we've all learned to think and feel and remember through our cranial brain. What about our heart? Do you know how to access the language of your heart so that you can tap your heart's wisdom, your heart's intuition? Do you know what that language is? This is where the beauty of these discoveries come together. Because when I was in school, I was taught that the brain is the master organ of the body, and I think probably you were taught the same thing. And the brain certainly is important. But what we now know is that the brain receives many of the instructions that tell it what to do from the heart. So the heart is sending signals to the brain, and the brain then is responding to these signals. This is where it gets really, really interesting, because what we now know is that we can function with the brain. We can think and learn and remember from our brain only. There are some cultures and some traditions that have learned to do just the opposite. From the time they're born, they think, learn, and remember. They interpret the outside world through their hearts as children. Then they begin to learn to interpret the world through their brain. Here's where we benefit from both of these. We can harmonize our heart and our brain together. We can tune the nervous system in our heart and our brain, between our heart and our brain. We can tune the sensory neurites in our heart to the neurons in our brain. So we're talking about two organs. I'll be very clear. Two organs, one powerful, potent neural network. And when we do this, when we tune our heart and our brain together, two organs, a single potent neural network, we open the door to the extraordinary experiences that we've read about from the monks and the nuns and the abbots and the shamans and the ancient and the indigenous traditions, the experiences that often were considered mystical, only experienced by special people with special abilities. Now we know that's not true. 200,000 years ago, we showed up on this earth. We showed up with the wiring for these abilities intact. It did not develop slowly over a long period of time as an evolutionary process. That means that we are wired, we are designed to have these experiences and to be able to use them in our everyday lives. And what I'd like to do in the time that we have remaining here, what I'd like to do is let's just have an experience, one experience of how to access the beginning, this doorway to all of these other experiences, deep intuition, access to the subconscious, precognition. All of these experiences, they all result from our ability to move into our hearts. And that should come as no surprise because that's where those sensory neurites are located. So if I invite you to move into your heart, do you know what to do? Do you know how to do that? Now, I've had people look at me and they say, well, Greg, that's silly. Of course I know how to move into my heart. And then when they're tested in the laboratory, what we discover is this, that we in the West are so conditioned as a general population, we're so conditioned to living in our brain that when we're asked, when we're invited to move into our hearts, we stay in our brain and think about what it would be like if we were in our hearts, but we're still in our brains doing it. To me, this is the advantage. This is the power of spending time with our indigenous family, with our brothers and sisters in those monasteries and those nunneries and in the jungles of the Yucatan and the Andes Mountains, because they have the same questions and they go through the same process as we do when we try to access our hearts, and they've had to learn. And while we can glean from texts and books, there's nothing like sitting with a shaman or a monk or a nun in their monastery, in their land, in their place, their sacred place, and looking them right in the eye and asking them, how do you do this? How do you move into your heart? So let's do this. Let's take this opportunity together in this intimate moment and begin the first step of the process that opens the door to these amazing, empowering, extraordinary mystical experiences. Let's move into our hearts. So I'm going to invite you first to simply close your eyes so that you're shifting your awareness from the outer world into your inner world. And this sends a very powerful signal to your body. This is the first step. A very powerful signal that you are now turning your awareness, focusing inward. And I'm going to invite you to shift that focus from your mind into your heart. Now, this is where the indigenous perspective is so powerful, because what our indigenous family says is that if we can touch our heart center gently in a way that's comfortable for us, it can be an open palm, like we see in the Middle East, like we see in the jungles in the Yucatan, the people greet themselves and one another in the morning this way. What we see the Buddhists doing is creating a mudra with their hands together. It's called the prayer mudra, and they actually touch their heart center in this way. Or many people will simply take an index finger or middle finger and just touch their heart center. Here's the key. Here's why we do this. Wherever your body feels the sensation, your awareness will automatically shift to that place. Your awareness will shift to the place of that sensation. So when you touch your heart center, your sternum, right here, your awareness is going right there to your heart. And this is one of the keys that we find in the indigenous communities to beginning this process, to moving into our hearts. All right, once we are in our hearts, right here, begin to breathe a little slower than usual. Whatever's comfortable for you, maybe 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale. This simple act sends a very powerful second signal to your body, because the only time you would slow your breathing to 5 seconds in or 5 seconds out is when you are safe, or when you feel that you are in a place that's safe. This safe signal, now that you are creating in your heart, permeates your body. It changes your body chemistry. And we're going to talk more about that in this series. For right now, here's what we've done. We have moved our awareness from our mind into our heart, and we are breathing a little slower, as if the breath is coming from our heart. And I'm going to give you a moment just to do that. I'm going to do the same. Okay, now that you are in this space, this is the beginning. There are more steps. I'm going to share them with you in subsequent videos. This is the beginning, because if we can't get into our hearts, the other steps aren't going to have the same impact. Once we're in our hearts, you remember those sensory neurites that I just mentioned that think, feel, and remember on their own? I'm going to invite you to ask your heart a question, any question, something that you've always wanted to know, and every time you ask another person, they give you a different answer, so you don't know which is right and which is wrong, and you feel like you're pulled in a million different directions, like I did when I was getting ready to leave the corporations, and I didn't know what was right for me. When I was in my heart on Mount Sinai, as I described in the first video, this is what was happening for me. So you have this opportunity now. Your heart knows. So here you are, in your heart right now, accessing 40,000 sensory neurites that think, feel, and remember independently of those in the brain. Ask your heart a question. And it doesn't take long to answer, because your heart doesn't tell you a story. The heart answers in brief, concise statements that have no judgment and no fear and are meaningful to you. I'm going to ask you, how did it feel? How did it feel when you moved your awareness into your heart and you began to breathe differently and you closed your eyes? What did you feel? What was different from your everyday world? This is going to be important to you in future portions of the series, because it opens the door to this gateway to the extraordinary possibilities. I want to thank you for spending the time with me today and allowing me to share this indigenous, ancient, precious wisdom, this deep insight with you. When we go into the deeper aspects, what happens next? How do we go from being in our heart to opening the door to the deep aspects of intuition? And what does it mean in our everyday lives? This is where we're going to go. In the next video, we're going to take these ideas even deeper. We'll take them to the next level. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much. To welcome you to the third video in our series. Just to recap, in the previous videos, we began by asking a very, very powerful question that impacts every facet of our lives and every moment of every day. The very simple question, who am I? We began to see how the way we are conditioned to answer that question is based on 150 years of science, scientific thinking that has now been overturned by new discoveries. And among those discoveries, we zeroed right in on the topic of you, me, and human evolution, and how the new science no longer supports the old ideas of evolution. The bottom line is that we showed up, we modern humans, we showed up on this earth about 200,000 years ago. We don't know precisely where we came from. We know there is no clear evolutionary path that led to our appearance. But here's the key. This is why this is important. We showed up with all of the advanced abilities that we have available to us today, fully intact, already developed. They did not develop slowly over long periods of time. So the advanced nervous system, the advanced brain, our ability to tune and hone our nervous system in very precise ways, these appear to be abilities that have been with us from the very beginning. In other words, we are wired, we are designed to have the experiences that are made possible through this advanced nervous system, specifically through the 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart that are called sensory neurites. These are the brain-like cells in our heart. They think, they remember, they feel independently from the brain in our head, and we can access them in that way independently, or we can tune them. We can literally marry our heart and our brain. We can merge these two potent neural networks together to give us the extraordinary experiences that have seemed mystical for people in the past, reserved for those who were trained over long periods of time, living in the monasteries and the nunneries and the indigenous peoples throughout the world. So where we left off is we actually had an experience of what it's like when we begin to access this extended neural network. We had an experience of shifting our awareness from our brain into our heart. And before we go on, I just want to talk a little bit about why this is so important. You know, we live in a world made of electrical and magnetic fields. This is scientific fact. And the single organ in our body that has the strongest electrical field and the strongest magnetic field, it's not the brain, it's the heart. The very first organ to form in your body when you're in your mother's womb is your heart. And it's no surprise to me as I begin to understand the interaction of our bodies with these fields of energy that we would need the organ that is designed to interact with the stuff our world is made of. We would need that organ first in our lives, and we continue to use it throughout our lives in very, very precise ways. And if we choose to take this to the next step, we can actually tune these abilities, refine these abilities to give us the extraordinary opportunities of deep intuition, self-healing, on-demand, powerful immune systems, super learning, the ability for super learning, the opportunity to trigger the anti-aging hormones that are already in our bodies waiting to be triggered. All of these, as different as they seem from one another, direct access to our subconscious mind, as different as they are from one another, they all stem from our ability to tune our heart and our brain together. So in our last video, we took the first step to do just that. We shifted our awareness from our mind into our heart, and we asked our hearts a question to allow these sensory neurites to answer that question for us. And now what I'd like to do, I'm going to invite you to share the next step with me. Let's take this to the next level. Once we're in our hearts, how do we actually tune the heart and the brain, our hearts and our brains together? Every moment of every day, there is a conversation that's happening between your heart and your brain. It's happening right now. Your heart is sending information to your brain, a lot of information, and your brain is actually responding and sending information back to the heart, but to a lesser degree. The brain communicates with the heart to a lesser degree than the heart does to the brain. So it's happening every moment of every day. Here's the question: do you know what your heart is saying to your brain? Do you know what your heart is saying to your brain right now? The Institute of Heart Math, a pioneering research institution in Northern California, who are doing just that, pioneering the research into the understanding of the human heart in non-traditional ways, things that are not typically done in universities. Their research has opened the door to helping us understand about this communication and how we can access it in our lives. So for example, one of the things that we can see is that the conversation between our heart and our brain, when we are feeling feelings such as frustration, or anger, or hate, or jealousy, or rage, things that you typically would call a negative experience. What we're actually doing is we're sending a signal through that negative experience to our brain. It's a very jagged, chaotic-looking signal. It's like a bad day on the stock market. Okay? And when our brain receives that signal, it releases the chemistry that matches the signal. So a jagged, chaotic signal releases the stress chemistry, high levels of adrenaline and cortisol, which is good for a short period of time. When we need to respond quickly to a threat in our world, you want those. But you don't want to live your life day in and day out in this stressful way, with the stress chemistry always present. And here's the reason why. Because when we are experiencing the stress chemistry, our body makes a choice, and it says, if something is important enough to create that stress chemistry, then we don't need so much right now a strong immune system. We don't need so much right now the anti-aging hormones. So we'll give less energy to those, and we'll focus more on whatever it is that's causing the stress. So you can see, short term, that's a good thing. You don't want to live your life day in and day out like that, and you may know people that do in your workplace, in your family. I certainly have worked with people that way. And they are the ones that are most susceptible to the difficulties of life. When the flu goes through the office, they're the first ones that catch it. They look older than their years because they are wearing this stress. So when we shift the signal between our heart and our brain to an even rhythm that's called a coherent rhythm, all that chemistry changes. When we shift into that rhythm, our body says, We don't need that stress chemistry to the same degree any longer. We can stop producing so much adrenaline and cortisol. Let's go back to the anti-aging hormones. Let's kick those into overdrive so this person is young and healthy and vibrant. Let's trigger the immune response so that this person can navigate with their children in daycare and be around people in the airports and at school and in the workplace and in the malls, all that they want, because their immune system is so strong that they are not as susceptible to the opportunistic bugs that we seem to find in those kinds of public places. So here is the question: how do we make that shift? How do you shift from the jagged, incoherent signal to the even, regular, coherent signal? And this is where it gets really interesting, because it's all about the emotion that you choose to create and to experience in your heart. You choose the emotion, and your body reflects that through the chemistry of that emotion. So, when we think about this in relation to the new discoveries and what we know, what does it tell us? When we begin the process, the technique of shifting our awareness from our brain into our heart, that is the first step toward honing, tuning these two powerful neural networks together. The second step now is what I'd like to share with you here. But to do that, we're going to have to go back and let's re-experience what we did in the last video. A little quicker this time. I won't go into as much detail, but it's the first step in the process to allow us to do just this. So I'll begin as we did before. I'm going to invite you to first close your eyes so that you are turning your awareness inward. You're shutting out the diversions and the distractions of the outside world. It's a powerful signal you're sending to your body. It's the first one right now. Turning your awareness inward. Second step is to shift your awareness into your heart from your mind. And as we explored in the last video, one of the ways to do this is to simply touch your heart center in a way that is comfortable for you, with a finger or two fingers, an open palm. If you prefer, Buddhists do it this way in the monasteries, but this isn't about religion. It's about a powerful internal technology that we've had available to us for over 200,000 years, that we are only now reawakening in our everyday lives in the modern world. So if you can touch your heart center gently in a way that's comfortable for you. The reason you do this is because your awareness will always go to the place where you feel that touch. If I touch my arm, my awareness goes to my arm. If I touch my knee, it goes to my knee. Touching my heart. Now my awareness is moving to my heart, and I invite you now to begin to breathe a little slower from this place, as if your breath is coming from your heart. Maybe 5 seconds inhale and 5 seconds exhale. Whatever it is comfortable for you. This sends a powerful second signal telling your body that you are in a place and a time that is safe, because that is the only time you would slow your breathing. In this way, and that slower breath releases the signal into the body that says it's okay to do this. We don't need to be stressed or fight or flight, okay? This is where we left off in the last video. Now the next step. This is what establishes the communication between the heart and the brain. Remember I said every moment of every day we have this conversation going on between the heart and the brain. Now we are taking command of that conversation. We are determining what our heart is saying to our brain, and the way we do this is by having a feeling, a very specific kind of feeling. So I'm going to invite you, to the best of your ability, if you can feel in your heart feelings such as appreciation for anything or anyone, gratitude for anything or anyone, care, compassion, appreciation, gratitude, care, compassion. What the researchers have found is that these 4 words, if you choose any one of these 4, they tend to trigger in most people the optimal signal between the heart and the brain. It's called coherence. It's a very low frequency signal. It's less than 1 hertz. It's 0.1 hertz. So you are feeling the emotion of a low frequency signal, but you don't need to know that. You're feeling the emotion of 0.1 hertz, optimum coherence between the heart and the brain. Now we are tuning these 2 separate neural networks into a single potent network This is the key to the extraordinary and mystical experiences that you've read about all of your life, that you've heard about from the ancient, the indigenous peoples that you've met throughout your lifetime. This is the key. Once we establish this connection, it's the doorway, it's the portal to a myriad of experiences, some that we've already talked about, deep states of intuition on demand when you choose to have that intuition. Powerful, powerful doorway to the subconscious. If you've ever used affirmations in your life, an affirmation is designed to repattern a belief that we hold in our subconscious. So for that affirmation to be effective, we must communicate with our subconscious in a language that's meaningful to the subconscious. That makes sense, doesn't it? This experience is the doorway that opens the path to that subconscious. So when you are in this space, this is where you would have those affirmations. Say, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now, or my body is in perfect health. Those kinds of affirmations, or whatever you choose. Super learning. What scientists have found is that when we establish this relationship, it kicks our brain and our heart together into a state that allows for greater retention and greater learning, greater storage and greater access to what we have already experienced. Super learning. If you've ever looked at brain states, it actually involves the gamma state of the brain waves, a very highly elevated state of awareness. And if you're not into any of that, maybe you're watching this video, maybe this is the first one you've seen, and you say, you know, that stuff doesn't interest me so much, but I just want to be really healthy. Well, this works for you as well, because what I'm inviting you to do right now is the gateway to optimal health. If you're not into any of those other experiences, simply by making this connection, number one, you trigger an enhanced immune response. What scientists have found is that the SIGA in our mouth, our first line of defense for the immune system, goes sky high after 3 minutes of doing just what we're doing right now. Triggers that very, very powerful immune response. Not only can we heal broken strands of DNA, but we actually have the ability to regenerate this DNA within our bodies. In addition to all of these things, I began this series by talking to you about the context of our lives and our world. We're living a time that the experts call a time of extremes. We've got to think and live differently, more so now than we ever have in the past. And we all have what is called a baseline of resilience, the way that we have learned to deal with life and to deal with change in our lives. Well, our lives are all about change right now, and I bet you're seeing it in your life right now as well. Simply by doing what we're doing right now, what we do is we raise the baseline of our resilience. We're not changing what happens in the world out there, we're changing how we respond. We're empowering ourselves to respond in a conscious, healthy way. Not just survive, but giving ourselves the ability to thrive in the change of our lives. All of this from opening this portal, by honing this communication, by tuning our heart and our brain together. So this is one example of why it's important to understand the answer to this question, who am I? The new discoveries are telling us who we are, and what they're telling us is we're not what we've been told in the past, and we are absolutely more than we've ever imagined. And what I'm sharing with you right now is one example of where we can go with this. So in the next video, I'm going to share with you how you can access the online course that goes into every one of these functions, every one of these extraordinary experiences to an even deeper level in a way that you can access it and apply it immediately in your everyday lives in a way that is meaningful, honest, truthful, factual, and I gotta tell you, it's a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much.